Firm belief or certainty? Someone made an interesting comment on one of my videos in which I was discussing how to deal with contradictions in the New Testament. They wrote, "How do you form a firm belief based on inaccurate, contradictory accounts?" That got me thinking again, which is why comments are so useful, even the negative ones. Not that this was a negative one. Is a firm belief the goal when considering religious faith? And what exactly does firm mean here? Is it different from certainty? If so, by what amount can it be below certainty? I realise that many people watching this video may not have seen many or even any of my previous videos. There are 406 of them as I record this one. They're on a whole range of topics, including religious and philosophical themes. I perhaps should mention that I used to be an Anglican priest, but these days I don't believe in God. I probably should say that at the start of each of these videos so that people understand where I'm coming from. However, that's pretty tedious and I'm likely to just forget. But there, I did it for this one. I think this idea of a firm belief is worth investigating. To begin with, it seems to me that a belief that can be destroyed by a contradiction in the biblical text, or even many such contradictions, is anything but firm. Fragile is the word I would use for such a belief. Now, it's probably fair to say that the New Testament does indeed advocate for a steadfast faith. So, for example, Colossians chapter 1, verses 21 to 23 says, "And you who were once estranged and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he has now reconciled in his fleshly body through death, so as to present you holy and blameless and irreproachable before him, provided that you continue securely established and steadfast in the faith, without shifting from the hope promised by the gospel that you heard, which has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven." This is from the New Revised Standard Version, the updated edition. The New International Version says, "If you continue in your faith, established and firm." It's about building a firm foundation. But what foundation is this referring to? Well, according to Colossians, this is Paul's own teaching. Colossians claims to have been written by Paul, but probably wasn't. Nevertheless, the author is appealing to Paul's authority. Let's say briefly that the foundation is the gospel that was preached to them. Paul himself, yes, the actual Paul, makes this explicit in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 1 to 2. "Now I want you to understand, brothers and sisters, the good news that I proclaimed to you, which you in turn received, in which also you stand, through which also you are being saved, if you hold firmly to the message that I proclaimed to you, unless you have come to believe in vain." So for Paul, at least, a firm faith is one that holds fast to his preaching. Note that the Gospels were not yet written at the time that Paul was writing, nor was there anything like a New Testament. So you can conclude from this that belief in the Bible as such is not the basis of a firm belief. It's the gospel as preached. People believed before there was a New Testament and before there were Gospels. It might be argued, though, that it's only through the Bible and specifically the New Testament that contemporary Christians have access to the gospel. So the question is, does the New Testament reliably communicate this gospel? And this, I think, is where the fear of biblical criticism arises. Don't contradictions in the New Testament, especially the Gospels, undermine the reliability of the message? Similarly, don't the doctrinal differences that are found within the New Testament undermine faith in the gospel message? Because, despite what you might want to convince yourself, the Bible, even the New Testament, does not speak with one voice. It's not univocal. Different doctrines and interpretations are expressed by different authors. The reformer Martin Luther intensely disliked the Epistle of James, calling it an epistle of straw, because it seems to preach a doctrine of salvation by good works rather than by faith alone, which was very much the Pauline and Luther's own teaching. As I've expressed in other videos, these issues often lead Christians down the fruitless path of trying to harmonize the New Testament, both the facts that it conveys and the theology it proclaims. This quest is doomed to fail, and if you build your faith on this foundation, your faith will eventually collapse, unless, as many people choose to do, you simply switch off your mind. I think the mistake here, or at least one mistake, is to confuse the concept of a firm faith with certainty. The quest for certainty, for absolutes, is one of the flaws of our modern society. It's what leads to phenomena like biblical literalism and political totalitarianism. We've become extremely uncomfortable with a lack of certainty. We desperately want certainty, and unfortunately, this often involves surrendering our rationality and our autonomy. We want to divide the world and everything in it into black and white, either or. But almost nothing in reality actually fits into that model. Science is, or ought to be, comfortable with uncertainty, although inevitably scientists too can fall into dogmatism. But uncertainty drives science. Without questions, science would not exist. I actually think this is true of life in general. It's the way to live life. Something I've always done throughout my whole life, before I was a Christian, while I was a Christian, and since I ceased being a Christian, is to seek knowledge and understanding, not certainty. Most definitely not certainty. I actually don't have a goal or a destination when I'm searching for knowledge and understanding. I don't know where I'm going. I don't need to know. I don't think I even want to know. There are just way stations where I pause for a while to look around again. But I've drifted away somewhat from the question of faith, specifically religious faith. Is a firm faith the goal? Not if this is interpreted as certainty. What is the essence of the gospel message? Can Christians actually agree on an answer to that question? Maybe it's something like this. God loves you, and Jesus Christ died and rose again so that you can be saved from sin and be restored to God. You may want to add some other elements to this. I'm sure many Christians would, and probably not always the same things either. But I'm fine with any bits you might add that you think all Christians would agree to. Good luck with that. However, I suspect that Paul preached pretty much that, and the rest was elaboration, exposition, explanation, and so on. And really, if you want the Bible, and particularly the New Testament, to provide the basis for your faith, the only question you really need to ask is, does the Bible reliably express this idea? Your answer to this question may still be yes or no or maybe. But if it's yes, the rest is probably not very important. My personal answer to this is yes, it does reliably express this idea. But I reject the idea itself. Yes, I hear the idea and I reject it. It doesn't fit with reality as I understand it after many rests at many way stations along the way. I don't think God exists. The Bible can never provide a basis for believing in God. At most, it can provide insights into the nature and purpose of God if you already happen to believe in Him. It was never the intention of the biblical writers to provide proof or evidence for the existence of God. That was just a given. If He does exist, I don't think there's any evidence that He's loving. I also don't accept the diagnosis that this distilled version of the gospel presents, namely that we are in sin and therefore need saving from sin. I think both the diagnosis and the proposed cure are unhelpful. Therefore, I reject the idea which, yes, the New Testament presents quite clearly, despite all the variations you'll find in there. You, on the other hand, might accept it, despite all those same variations. just enjoy the journey.